Hello and welcome. In this morning's training flight, you'll learn how to intercept and fly your assigned course and altitude in the Su-25. What you learn here can be transferred and put to good use in the A-10 and any other aircraft that you fly. The primary instruments used for navigation are the ADI, or Attitude Direction Indicator, and the HSI, Horizontal Situation Indicator. As their names indicate, the ADI orients you in three-dimensional space, that is, right and left and up and down, while the HSI orients you in only two, right or left. The HSI gives you the grosser measurement, so you start there, get onto your basic course, and then fine-tune with the ADI. We'll talk more about that once we get airborne. Okay, powering up. Gauge is holding steady. Check our airspeed. And we're airborne. I'm going to hold this course while we climb to our altitude. It'll allow the needles on the HSI to diverge. It'll be easier for you to understand what's going on. Our assigned altitude for the first waypoint is 2,000 meters, but I'll climb above that because there's, again, then on the ADI it'll be easier to show you what's going on if I don't deal with all the dimensions at once. So to start, we'll deal with right and left. Okay, now look at the HSI display. On it you see two needles. When we were on the ground, they were superimposed one on top of each other, but now they're diverging. One arrow, the slimmer arrow, has a circle at the top. That is your waypoint bearing needle. It always points to the selected waypoint. The second wider needle is the course needle. If it's pointing to the left of the waypoint bearing needle, it's telling you that you're to the left of the course that you need to be on, which means then you have to bear to the right of the waypoint needle. If it's pointing to the right of the waypoint needle, then it means that you have to steer left or fly left of the needle to get back on course. I just want to make a quick mention that anytime you see the lights on the display there are completely off, it means that altitude stabilization has been engaged. So if you should take control of the aircraft yourself, check the panel. If nothing green is showing, when you take control, press the H key to disengage altitude stabilization. Right now I'm going to turn 180 degrees and we'll fly back down towards the airbase to pick up our course. As we do so, you can watch the two needles begin to converge as we approach the course. Rather than come in at 90 degrees to our actual course to pick it up, as we get closer, as the needles start to converge, I will turn to a bearing that'll leave us about 30 degrees off. It'll be easier to pick up the course that way. You don't need to make such sharp deviations in your flight path. Quick check of our airspeed here. It's supposed to be at 500 kilometers per hour, so I'll need to reduce that a tad. Okay. On the left there, you see the circle on the needle. That's our waypoint bearing needle. And the other wider needle is slowly coming down and converging on it. What I'm going to do now is bank. And the bearing needle is pointing to roughly, it looks like 310 degrees, 305. So I'll put us on a heading of 335 degrees. And we'll intercept it there. Back to level flight on the ADI above. We'll approach the desired course on this bearing, and then just before the needles converge, I will bank again to the left to shallow out our approach angle to about 10 degrees or so. One thing you'll notice is that when you're flying the gauges, you don't spend a whole heck of a lot of time with your head outside the cockpit. You're mostly down looking at gauges. Okay, they're just about converged. Let's go ahead and bank in towards it. And I'll hold us here at about 10 degrees. Notice the needle on the ADI above swinging across. It means that we've just crossed our desired course. Now on the ADI, the vertical needle tells you the direction you must fly to center yourself up right on course. We're just about on the right course, but not quite. Just keeping a slight bank to the left because the needle is just slightly left on the ADI. And notice now the marker coming across to the center ball. Okay, we've picked up our course and we are exactly centered. The idea now is to keep both the vertical needle centered and the marker centered in the ball at the top of the gauge. I've disengaged altitude stabilization. I'm going to slowly sink down to our flight altitude. Now watch the ADI. See this yellow bar on the bottom. As we approach our desired altitude, or the altitude that we've been assigned, which is actually 2,000 meters, you'll see it rise off the bottom. If you remember when we were on the ground before we took off, it was at the top of this gauge. That was because, well, our assigned altitude was 2,000 meters more or less above us. Now we're slowly sinking down towards it. And at the same time, I'm taking care to make sure that the vertical needle on the ADI remains centered and the indicator at the top of the scale is centered in the circle. The yellow horizontal line should start moving momentarily. There we go. Coming up. Shallow out my dive a little here. We don't want to blow right through it. And I'll engage horizontal stabilization again once we get to our flight level of 2,000 meters. Okay, it's engaged. Okay, and now when that thick horizontal yellow line is centered on the horizon line, we are at the indicated altitude. And if you notice here on the left-hand side of the scale of the ADI, there's another circle and the white line right through that. That's telling me that we're right on our assigned altitude of 2,000 meters. Okay, and now to the left, just to the left of the HSI, is your waypoint distance. That's giving it to me in kilometers. So we're just watching it tick down. It's 7 kilometers now to our waypoint. Just keep all the gauges centered, and we'll fly right over the waypoint. When we do, we will then shift to waypoint number 2 automatically, and it's going to call for us to drop in altitude down to about 200 meters. And from that point, life will get a little bit interesting because I've set up markers. As long as they're flying directly along the right flight path, we'll be crossing each marker in turn. This will be good practice for you too when you take over controls. Okay, next waypoint has clicked in. Let's get ourselves back on track. Okay, settle in more or less on this course coming down. It's not flying to the ground. Keep an eye on the radar altimeter. Keep an eye on your speed. Keep an eye on your heading and bearing. A lot to do all at once, especially when you're going through a major altitude change. Okay. The ADI, see the needle is pointing to the left, which means we need to bear a little bit to the left now to pick up our course. That's a direct line between waypoint 1 and waypoint 2. So again, I got the gross course setting off of the HSI. Now I'm fine-tuning it with the ADI. And there's our first marker. We're about to cross right over the top of it. You can see it there right in front of our nose here. Okay, and let's lower our altitude to our assigned altitude. Notice that the yellow horizontal bar is at the bottom of the ADI gauge, and so we're going to slowly sink down until it's centered where it needs to be. And of course, at the same time, we keep the horizontal needle on the ADI centered and the marker at the top of the gauge centered right in that small circle. And here comes our altitude indicator climbing up the gauge. And let's finesse it into place here. We've caught our assigned altitude of roughly 200 meters. That's based on air pressure, it's 200 meters above sea level. You'll notice if you look at the radar altimeter, we're actually slightly below 200 meters. And here's the waypoint number 2 marker directly under our nose. So far so good. We're flying right on course. Okay, waypoint 3 is to our left. Turning onto the new course. Since we've flown beyond the waypoint 2 marker, I'm going to cross all the way over to the left side of the bearing needles here on the HSI. Fly back up to intercept our course. Okay, we've crossed it. Now I'm going to come back to the right. Now just pay attention to the ADI and the horizontal, the vertical needle. We want that centered and the marker at the top of the gauge centered in that circle. And I can see our mid-course marker out there ahead of us, right in front of our nose. So we know that we're on course. Okay, let's fly the needles here. Just hold with that vertical needle centered, and it'll bring us right back up onto our course. Okay, another 17 kilometers to go to waypoint 3. And then we'll switch headings again and head towards waypoint 4. Altitude hold is engaged. Checking our airspeed. 500 kilometers per hour, just as it's supposed to be. Those of you transitioning from the American glass cockpits can tell that you spend an awful lot of time in the Su-25 with your head down in the cockpit checking gauges. You don't get that much time to look around. especially not if you're trying to fly a precise course. And why would you want to fly a precise course? Well, there are a number of reasons. Sometimes it's just plain fun. Those of you who are into orienteering know what I mean. But there are also times when there are only one or two safe courses through either enemy territory or through the forward line of advance, where everything else is a free-fire zone and you don't want to be taken out by somebody on your own side. So it's not enough to arrive at a certain waypoint, but you have to do it along a certain flight path. And that's what this is designed to teach you to do. Okay, here's our waypoint marker right ahead of us, right in front of our nose. And there's the next waypoint, off to our right. As you can tell from the ADI, if you look at the altitude indicator, this is also supposed to be flown at 200 meters. So even if you haven't copied that down from the briefing map, the attitude direction indicator will tell you what the correct altitude you're supposed to be flying is. Okay, coming back to the left now after I've crossed our track. Coming back to the left to intercept it again. Just slowly S our way back and forth until we've got it locked in. Okay, the vertical needle is saying we still need to go a tad to the left. And now it's shifting a tad to the right, so we'll go a tad to the right, and that should bring the small bar right into the center of that ball. And then we just hold it there. Okay, so check the HSI. You see that we are on our basic course. On the ADI, we fine-tuned our course for both direction and altitude. We're at the proper altitude. The horizontal yellow line is on the horizon, and also the small marker on the left of the scale is centered in the ball. And we're sliding slightly off course here to the left. Let's bring it back on the upper ball on the ADI. Just have to keep them all centered. It's very precise. And here's our next marker coming up, our midpoint marker. Pretty good. "19 kilometers left to the waypoint." Just keep everything dialed in. Okay, now you cycle waypoints with the tilde key, which is the key just to the left of the 1 key. Each time you press it, you're at a new waypoint. You cycle through them in sequence. I shifted us back. There we go. Now we're back to our original waypoint, the waypoint that we were heading for before I started all this. So each press of the tilde key cycles through your waypoints. It goes to the next waypoint in sequence until you're back to your original. Sliding a little bit to the right of our desired course. Let's come back in. And there's our waypoint marker right in front of our nose. Okay, on to the last waypoint. And you'll notice now that the horizontal bar has jumped. That means that the assigned altitude for this leg of our flight is above us. I'm going to hold here, though, until we cross the midpoint, and then we'll climb. Notice that the needles have diverged, with a wider needle to the left of the waypoint direction indicator. So I shifted to the right of the course line to bring us back to the course. And now we're going to start banking in because they're just about perfectly superimposed. And there goes the vertical needle on the ADI. Start flying that now. Okay, we've crossed past the desired flight path to the left. Now we need to go a bit to the right. And get everything all centered up. Sometimes you just have to hold things steady until that vertical needle decides to move, and a lot of times the shift will be ever so slight, especially when you're fine-tuning. We're not talking much, it's a couple of meters to this side or that. Okay, and there's our mid-course marker ahead of us. Okay, and now let's climb up to our assigned altitude for this leg. Watch the horizontal bar on the yellow bar on the ADI. As we get close to the desired altitude, it'll start moving down the gauge. And as I bring us up to altitude, let's do a quick review. The two basic instruments that you're going to use for navigation are the ADI, or Attitude Direction Indicator, which is a three-dimensional display, and the HSI, or the Horizontal Situation Indicator, which is only two-dimensional. Use the HSI to get you basically on course, and then fine-tune your course with the ADI. Okay, we should be getting close to our desired altitude. There they go. Lines coming down the scale. Center the yellow line there in the center of the scale, right on the horizon line. And as long as everything is all lined up, that little line to the left of the scale will be centered in the ball. And that's how you know that you're on the precise altitude you've been assigned. when you're intercepting the course, do it at about 30 degrees, either right or left, depending on what you need. I've dialed in waypoint 1 back into the navigation system. I'm going to put us out onto a course that's going to head us in that general direction, but I'm going to leave the aircraft off to the left of the actual desired course. Altitude hold is engaged. Airspeed is 500 kilometers per hour. Okay, at this point, if you wish to take control of the aircraft yourself and fly out to waypoint 1, you can do so and put what you've seen here into practice. Just press the control and Q keys if you wish to take control of the aircraft yourself. If you wish to exit completely, press the escape key. Thank you. You have control.